Welcome back, everybody, to the Point of Order podcast, an inside look at California politics in the state legislature. And today, I have the honor of being joined by my co-host, Juan Alanis from Assembly District 22. Juan, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background in your district.
Sure. Well, good morning. Thanks for asking me to come here. I feel honored. I look at second episode, I kind of think Star Wars. I got Star Wars still on.
Oh, yeah. Mind. Episode 2, Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan Alanis.
Obi-Wan Alanis. So background, born and raised Modesto. I'm a sergeant with Stanislaus County Sheriff Office, who I'm still on vacation, burning out all my time so that way I can retire. And it's going to be weird saying I'm retired from the sheriff's office, but that's what I'll be.
Good for you, though. Yeah. Thank
you. And so 20 plus years in law enforcement actually seems to help me a lot up here in Sacramento, especially being vice chair of public safety. But we may talk about that later. But helps a lot. It's also nice that my kids are all grown up and they're out of the house. So my wife and I are empty nesters, so that makes things much easier up here in Sacramento as well.
That's pretty cool.
Yes.
I do see you and your wife around a lot, and it's really, I'm pretty jealous because my wife and I are still in that stage of the younger
kids,
younger kids, which is also amazing. But
it's great. Like we get asked to come to certain events, and I just send her a text like, "Hey, can we make this?" She's like, "Yep." She comes up with me.
I love it. That's so awesome.
It's we're an hour and a half drive, which I mean, it's okay, but yeah, it's nice to have her up here when I can.
What motivated you to run for the assembly? And
So prior to this, I was actually running for sheriff. I ran for sheriff in Stanislaus County 2018.
That's right, yeah.
And I was running in 22. And, I didn't know anything about redistricting at the time. Didn't really know much about it. I knew some people were running already in this race, in the assembly race, and I was encouraging them and clapping them, good job.
Yeah.
And never did I think I was going to get into this race. So Assemblymember Heath Flora, who I knew personally, reached out to me and he's like, "Hey, you'd be a great candidate for this. You could bring your law enforcement experience up here." And I was like, I don't know. That's like,
it's a big life change.
That's a big life change. I do not like to commute. But I came up to Sacramento. I remember I posted a picture of me with the Capitol in the background on my Facebook and just left it at that. Didn't say anything. And people were like, question mark, what's going on? What's going on? And I didn't say anything. But came up here and he showed me a lot of things that I can get involved with, be part of.
That's awesome.
Educate people on.
Yeah.
And I just had two things I needed to do. I needed to clear it with my wife. And second, I needed to check out my retirement because, as you know, we have no retirement up here. There's no medical. When you're done, you're done.
Yeah,
and so like a lot of people just assume that we're going to get a retirement out of this, that we're going to have like lifetime medical after this. Like, no, none of that exists.
Not for legislators.
Not for legislators. So I was able to check everything. Everything was good. And then obviously, with the kids not being home, not missing any football games, soccer games.
That's awesome.
Those kind of things made it even easier.
Yeah.
And so we had to reach out to our faithful supporters.
Yeah.
That
That's
have
awesome.
Juan Alanis for Sheriff shirts, Juan Alanis for Sheriff flags. I got these big flags in the district that say Juan Alanis for Sheriff.
Oh, that's amazing.
So we had to meet with them, had a big pizza party at the house, and
that's
it was like,
cool.
I got to talk to you guys about something. So we laid out everything, and everybody but two people were on board. So
that's awesome.
Out of 48, 50 people, two of them were like,
Love it.
Like, no, you need to go for sheriff. You need to go for sheriff.
Yeah. No, I know how that goes.
So we did it. Their biggest question is like, well, what do we do with our shirts and our flags? I'm like, I don't know, wash your cars, do your yard work, something like that. So, we jumped in and we obviously won. It was a great race. Very happy I'm up here.
What do you like? Well, first of all, we're really happy you're up here too.
Thank you.
It's funny. I was last week we were with Joe Patterson in here, and we were both saying how thankful we are to be local legislators and get to go see our kids every night because, like you said, I mean, it's a big life change, especially if you're not in Sacramento, having to commute or fly up here 4 days a week. It's a big change on your family. But what do you like? What do you like so far about the legislature, or not like about the legislature? Like, what has been something that you've kind of observed that you think's interesting?
Well, I do like that we've, as assembly members in general, everybody, personally, we're all great together. We see each other in the hallway, or we go to each other's offices, or we go out and have coffee, or maybe go grab some lunch and stuff like that. So it's good to get on a personal level with some of these people in the building and learn like what their priorities are, maybe like where they came from, like in life, those kind of things. Like get a better idea when they make their decisions. So I do like that, and learning to meet new people. As far as dislike, I mean, most of it's on the floor is what the dislike thing, because we have our personal sides, and then we have our, okay, this is my assembly side now, or my district, or our parties, and so
it's really important too, like to just think about your district. And I know I try really hard to focus on that when I'm on the floor, and it's
you and I,
a lot of things to consider.
You and I are very similar with our districts, and we were voted in and chosen by our district, so that's who we support and who we represent.
Absolutely. Well, hey, let's get into it. So we like to start by kind of recapping a few things that have happened over the last week. You and I both went to the CalChamber breakfast last week, and we heard from former Assembly Speaker Willie Brown, as well as former Mayor Willie Brown. And he kind of talked about the differences there. But I kind of wanted to, so, I took some notes from his speech because I thought it was super funny. So we can kind of go down these and get your thoughts on them. But first of all, the first thing he said out of the gate about running for speaker was that the House elects a speaker, not a caucus, meaning like it's not just the Democratic caucus or the Republican caucus. And that as speaker, he always sought to treat every member as a part of the process, regardless of party. But just his whole perspective, and he was even asked at one point about what were his thoughts on the demise of the Republican Party in California, and he actually said it's frankly too bad.
Yes,
right. Because it has really impacted the balance in the legislature. So, I mean, you were there. We were both there for that speech. What was your kind of take on that, and what did you think about Willie's statements?
When he did start off saying that, I'd like to know what the numbers were back then, like what the balance was on that.
It was closer for sure,
and I'm assuming it was much closer because it would prove to his point that the assembly votes, not the caucus votes, for him as speaker,
right, exactly.
and would make sense.
Yeah,
because now it's kind of like us with our districts. We got to think of our districts as opposed to party, and so I was getting the point that he was making on there, and it was also nice that he's retired, so he can say whatever he wants.
That's a really good point.
So he spoke freely, and
it was great to see the unaltered Willie Brown. Yeah,
no politics or anything, just
unedited,
straight up. This is how it is. So it was very cool to see that. It was also pretty cool to hear him talk about coming from, and you'll probably get into this later with going from being speaker to being part of the city.
Oh yeah, no, let's talk about that. I mean, like I came from local government on a school board. I've never been in city politics, but I mean, it was completely different worlds from his perspective,
and he seemed to love it.
And at first he said it was really hard to be like the CEO. Right, of a city versus a speaker of a legislative body, but he came to really love it, and I think that's he's such an incredible individual because he was able to experience. I mean, who gets to be the speaker of the assembly and the mayor of one of the largest cities in California? I mean, it's a really interesting perspective. So
and he seemed to really love it there. I mean, it was. I think it's even better because you take ownership of your place where you live. I mean, here we represent even though we do represent our districts, we still represent all of California. Sure, so we have so many things and working parts going here, whereas he gets to just focus on the one city, even though it's a huge city, still gets to be that city. And from the conversation that I was listening to, he sounded like he really liked it, loved it, and missed it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that sounded pretty cool. Almost made me want to do it.
Some days I do miss local government. I mean, it's very different, and I actually am adjusting to the job up here. But there is something about working like in your community every day. When you have to come to Sacramento every day, you get a little, you kind of miss your district a little bit. I'm looking forward to summer recess when I can get back to my district kind of full time.
Like, hey, I'm back, guys.
Time. Yeah, but I mean, it's really interesting. He also mentioned something about when he was talking about the Republican Party. that he did not allow the narrow view of one political party, or we did not allow the narrow view of one political party to prevail in California. Today, we are making our decisions on party preference, and that's not people preference for the state of California.
And again, he was making a point unfiltered.
Yeah, unfiltered.
Unfiltered, and like I wish others were able to hear that. I wish he could have just came to the floor and talked about that. That
Right.
would have been great. Because I think he sees it too, that we need that balance back. And it's, it doesn't need to be one side or the other, but we do need that balance. And
well, and you always have your partisan leanings and things like that. But I feel like we're living right now in this age of like hyper partisanship, where everything is seen through the lens of your political party. I'm not sure that's healthy for our democracy. Obviously I am a Republican, and I, agree on a lot of issues with the Republican Party platform, but there's a lot of bills and a lot of nuance in legislation that isn't just partisanship, right? And that goes kind of beyond those boundary lines. And so, I think it's really interesting.
I think some of them go way beyond some of the boundary lines.
Yeah.
It's like, where did you even come up with that? How did you? Like, I'm always wondering, like, it's kind of like a game. Just put a bunch of words or issues together, and it's like, okay, that made one bill. It's like that didn't make sense, but they make it a bill.
Yeah, no, it's true. So I'm hoping this new class of legislators will kind of help go beyond that, but I guess time will tell on that. So moving on here, Governor Newsom also spoke at that lunch, but we missed it.
Yeah, we had to leave. We actually had to go to work.
We had to go to work. So we ducked out. We're not able to see it. But, as part of that, he, I guess, proposed this new CEQA reform plan that he has. And for any of our listeners that don't know what CEQA is, it's the California Environmental Quality Act. And essentially it has governed, it was actually signed by Ronald Reagan back in the day, and it has kind of governed everything to do with projects and infrastructure in California and the process that you have to go to in order to get things approved. In my opinion, it's created a lot of roadblocks to a lot of housing,
unnecessary
infrastructure.
roadblocks.
I mean, your Central Valley water infrastructure. I mean, I know it's something you're really passionate about.
Yes.
And Sites Reservoir is something we've been talking about for years that continues to get held up by litigation under CEQA. So, just so many things. Actually, back when Governor Jerry Brown was in office, he actually called reforming CEQA the Lord's work. And it was that important to him. Sadly, the only thing that the legislature's really ever been do is kind of nibble around the edges and make exemptions or small changes. So the governor last week unveiled this plan aimed at speeding up big infrastructure projects. He aims to limit the time opponents can jam projects up in court with challenges under CEQA. This was actually interesting. He wants to accomplish big things. He says he wants to build infrastructure. One of the infrastructure projects he cited was, this is his quote: "As someone who's all in on high-speed rail, all I can think of is what if we had these principles before we laid out the project." Now, that wouldn't be the first project I would try to push forward. If I was talking about CEQA reform, I would love to see other projects, not high-speed rail personally, but I think the point behind it is, we need to make it easier to build in California. We need to reduce kind of these regulatory burdens, this litigation. And so, do you have any thoughts on this? And what are some infrastructure things you'd like to see?
That definitely wouldn't have been one of my. Obviously, water storage would be a big one for me.
Absolutely.
Take your pick of which one you want to do, but just do it. I hate to see another storm come through and us just watch all that water go to the ocean again. So in my district, I have a company called Hillmar Cheese, and they had made plans to build locally in Stanislaus County, and they ran into so much red tape that they decided to build in Kansas.
Wow.
And they told me the story about it. Like with Kansas, within 2 days, they already had everything they needed. And open arms. Basically, Kansas was like, you tell us what you need. And we just lost a business, probably 1,400 jobs that would have came with it. But that's just one story of many in different in ag, in the insurance world, and in small business, everything that we're losing there. You're hearing that same story, at least in my office, from people.
Absolutely.
Or and I know this has to do with CEQA, but same thing with the government wanting and imposing rules, regulations, and hey, we're going to help you with the funding, but then oh, hey, now we're pulling out. But you still got to do this.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the story across the board with everybody. And it's sad.
It's so unfortunate because we already have obviously a very large economy in California, but I always think about how much bigger it could be.
It could be,
right? If we
know
actually unleashed the power of industry and got out of the way of the free market, it's it's such a wonderful place to do business, and government needs to kind of get out of the way. But I think this CEQA example is a good one of the importance of streamlining government and getting government out of the way of these challenges. I mean, sadly, up until this point, what generally gets CEQA exemptions? It's like sports arenas. I mean,
locally.
Yeah. Prior to our time, right? Like this legislature voted on a number of CEQA exemptions for giant sports arenas. But we can't do that for housing. We can't do that for water infrastructure. And so I think it's frustrating, right? When you see, certain projects getting special treatment, which again, I'm not opposed to that, but let's make it a fair playing field, right?
Let's broaden that up and help out other industries as well.
Yeah, it's just So this will be interesting to see. I mean, we've seen CEQA proposals in the past. We'll see if the governor.
Did he say how soon he wanted to do this?
I mean, he made it sound like he wants to move this pretty quickly. That this is a top priority. This is it is important that he's the one pushing this, right? But at the end of the day, there's a lot of environmental groups that are raising a lot of concerns. I think, there's going to be some of our colleagues in the legislature will probably be concerned about some of the parts of this proposal. Yes. So the devil's in the details, right? Yes. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. I do definitely hope that high-speed rail isn't the first thing that that benefits from this.
That's not even in one of my. That's not even my top 10 there.
No. We need to put the brakes on that one. But let's shift gears a little bit. You mentioned your background in law enforcement. You were tasked with serving on the Public Safety Committee in the Assembly. So what has your experience been like so far serving on the Public Safety Committee, and kind of what? Yeah, I just wanted to kind of pick your brain on this.
So being vice chair on public safety is probably the best part right now, and could be the worst part, but is the best part because I get to speak from experience. A lot of my colleagues are looking at papers, they're going quote, or looking at data, or, they're doing this and that, and I'm just, hey, I know how this is, and I speak as it is. And, as it is, when we come up and we present a bill, we bring an expert with us or somebody who knows a little bit more about it than we do. And so I get to listen to this multiple times on the canine issue, consent searches, fentanyl, all them coming up and speaking. And then it's like, I take notes. And because, committee gets to ask these questions last, right? So you get the bills being presented, then opposition comes up, and then you get the Me Too's, and I'm still taking notes.
That's awesome.
And then it's time for committee. And now it's like, okay, now I get to bring up things awesome. I see my colleagues all shaking their heads up and down saying like, oh, wow, getting this information and taking it for what it's worth and that it should be the truth and the whole truth. But then I speak and I tear it apart. It's like, no, that's a lie. That's not how we do things. Yeah. Example, consent searches.
Yeah.
They came up with an expert who talked about the California Highway Patrol volunteering to be away or get rid of consent searches since 2001. And so I'm listening more and more. 2000, they did 2001, 2000. And I'm thinking, oh, I was around then. So I'm like, I knew exactly what it was called, Operation Pipeline. So the California Highway Patrol had a drug task force on I-5. They called it Operation Pipeline, where it was drug interdiction.
Yeah.
And so what they were doing is they were looking, they were finding cars that were carrying dope up north. So, and they were getting drugs left and right. Well, what they were telling their officers to do were to look for Hispanic males that looked like they didn't have driver's license. So they were essentially profiling.
Yeah.
And they did it at one step further, and they actually put it in their on paper in
Wow.
their on their mission ops. And so an attorney got a hold of that.
Wow. Yeah.
Took them to court, and guess
Yeah.
what? CHP wasn't allowed to do consent searches for like 7 years.
Wow.
And so this person who's supposed to be an expert is presenting it to the rest of us on the board, like, "Hey, look, CHP did it voluntarily." And I'm like, "No, they didn't." So it's like, "No, they were court ordered to do this."
Yeah.
And she's like, "Well, they volunteered now." I'm like, "Well, they could have maybe now, but that was a court order. Don't try and like
Yeah.
fool us, you know." And I'm looking at my colleagues like, "Oh, wow." Or like the canine bill. Somebody came up and said there had been over 6,000 apprehensions of unarmed persons. And I'm looking at my colleagues again like, "Wow, oh my gosh, 6,000 unarmed people." And I'm like, opposition, who used to be a canine handler. I already knew the answer, but I'm asking, I'm like, "Sir, you're a canine handler. Would you ever send your dog in when you know that the suspect is armed?" And he's like, "No." He's like, "Unless it was a life-saving thing," which, yeah, okay, if it was a life-saving thing. He goes, "But no, why would I do that?" He's like, "Yeah, because that's your partner. That's basically your family. It's department property. And who would send a dog? I mean, it's also inhumane to send the dog in knowing they're going to get shot or killed."
Yeah.
And so I'm looking at my colleagues again, like they're twisting it.
Yeah.
And so those are like what I tell people my aha moments of like why I'm up here.
Yeah.
To educate and call off my experience, basically.
Yeah.
And do it. So it's been working out great.
That's awesome.
You know, as far as bills coming through, I've got a few of them passed through, and
that's great.
No. So
you had one on Prop 47?
So I did one on Prop 47. I at first had it full on.
They killed mine. So
yeah, well, mine got. I didn't get any no's on mine, but
no, yours is
appropriations took care of it.
Okay.
So I saw you, I saw Patterson, I saw all of you. Basically, your Prop 47 bills not getting through at all, right? Well, Joe ended up getting one at the end, but I was like, we got to do something different. So my team worked with the committee as they care about data. Yeah. They want to see data. Okay, well, I want to, and there's two parts to Prop 47. There's the drug part that took drug possession and drug paraphernalia stuff from felonies to misdemeanors. Right. And then there's the grand theft from 400 to 950. So affecting our small businesses. Yep. So I'm just concentrating on that part right now.
That's awesome.
And so I wanted to prove that we're losing more in retail theft than we are gaining by closing these prisons. Well, the claim to fame is we're saving $100 million a year by closing prisons. So I want to prove that we're losing more than that. And I know one of the Walmarts in my district has like $4 million in assets that have been of retail theft. And so if that's just one store, I know I'm going to get my 100,000 or my 100 million. Yeah. And unfortunately, appropriations didn't agree that it should go on through.
Move forward. Yeah.
Yeah. And so
but it's a great approach in finding ways where we can, get bills passed. I mean, I think it's really important.
And it was even bipartisan. Even the chair. Yeah. The chair was signed on that one.
I think that's awesome. And, for Prop 47 specifically, I mean, we passed that bill this year, which I thought was a step in the right direction. I'm on the Joint Legislative Audit Committee, and we passed an audit request to audit the Prop 47 outcomes and really dive into, kind of the results of Prop 47, which again, getting more information, I think is a good thing.
I think it'll
great. Help us inform our public policy moving forward.
And that's just the small business part. Yeah. If you want to go, and this is when, people talk to us about homelessness all the time. Well, what about homelessness? Well, from a cop's point of view, I blame Prop 47. Yeah. Again, we took this felony possession charge for drugs down to misdemeanors. So me, my deputies, officers, they're just citations. And
decimated the drug courts.
And it did. And people are usually rock bottom when they get arrested. And being arrested is a bad thing, but it could also be a good thing. It could be a turn of their life. It could be getting them back on their feet. I've had people thank me in drug court for arresting them because they got their life back. They got their kids back because they went and got the counseling and the help they needed. Yep. And I don't see any of these homeless people out here wanting to voluntarily put themselves in rehab. Yeah,
it kind of, there was a carrot and a stick, but now you've gotten rid of the stick.
We got rid of all of it,
right?
Yes.
So, no, that's a really great point. It's really cool to see, us be able to utilize expertise. And I love hearing like just that you get to speak from your experience on the Public Safety Committee. I'm sure you're on committees where you don't feel like a subject matter expert.
Oh, I do.
As I am. I'm on the Environmental Safety and Toxic Materials Committee, and I'm like, well, this is new.
I'm on sub 1, which is medical. So you got like 3-4 doctors on there.
Yeah.
And I'm listening to them talk, and I'm like, this is what it feels like when I'm on public safety.
When you're not in your wheelhouse, right? I mean, it's so true, though. When I get to sit on the Assembly Education Committee, which is kind of my background, coming from a school board, and I love it because I do. I approach it the same way you approach public safety, where I'm like, no, that is not accurate. I've been in those trenches, right? Like that is not how this works. And I get to actually speak from that experience, but then I go sit in environmental safety or natural resources or something. I'm like, okay, this is a learning experience, right? So it's just really, but it's awesome that we get to use our expertise and kind of, give back in that way as well in the areas that we can. So, well, I appreciate you talking about that. I'm going to, you mentioned that your bill died on suspense. So this last week, we had the, famous or infamous, maybe is a better term, Assembly appropriation suspense hearing.
I call it the watch party.
The watch party.
Everybody was watching in their offices.
Oh, everybody, right? Yeah, we were all waiting, and my staff was ready to tell me all the bad news and everything. I think I went 1 for 2, so it wasn't too bad. But it's kind of this time of the year, and it's such a weird process, right? Because you get a bill that means you got it out of policy committee. It moves to the appropriations committee, which is supposed to assess the fiscal impacts of the bill. And they do, they tag it with costs, and under a certain threshold, it can go out on consent or kind of just get voted out. But over a certain threshold, right, it can get caught up in the suspense hearing. The problem is once it gets to that suspense hearing, it's like all transparency disappears, and it's just kind of like the lottery at that point, right? Like whatever the chair decides. And so it's such I don't know, maybe another podcast we can dive into the appropriations process, but it's as a new legislator, it's a really crazy process.
Well, yeah, even for me, like very first time watching it, I was watching it in my office, just a portion.
Yeah.
And I watched the chair talk, like say, Assemblymember Hoover, and he said, no, yes, yes, no, no, yes, right? Yeah. And then so I'm listening, he says his own name. Yes, 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 yes.
I did notice that. I did notice that. I think it's just a coincidence.
Well,
right?
Yeah, right. I guess that's the
hey, that's the benefit of being the chair of appropriations is you get to send your bills out, right? But
so I think what I'll do is next time I have a bill, I'll ask him to author it. That's what I'm
there. You go.
Do.
See, now that's a great strategy right there. But they do this twice a year, the suspense hearing. This year there were a number of bills, and I'll just move through this really quickly because I do want to get on to some of these other bills coming up on the floor. But some of the bills that died in the suspense hearing were a bill to expand tax credits for poor families, authored by Miguel Santiago. See, Siri's always listening. There was a bill. A few climate change bills that were held on appropriations. We had this bill going after crisis pregnancy centers was actually held on appropriations. And then a bill on healthcare affordability and homelessness. I mean, you kind of can just go down the list here, and a number of things were stopped for the year, and basically that means they're dead for the year, right? How did you fare, by the way? I didn't even ask.
So we had 6, and we had 2 out of the 6 pass.
Okay. So
I mean, at least I got 2.
It could have been worse.
I should be thankful for that. I had the gold star ones. I was really hoping my gold star ones would be for like getting them in the parks, getting a fishing license and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I thought that would have been a good gesture from California saying, thank you.
Yeah,
for your family member.
Those got held up.
Yeah.
Interesting. I actually got a veterans bill out of appropriations. So the one bill that I did get out of the suspense hearing, it's actually a bill to increase access to the property tax exemption that veterans get when they purchase a home. And so they're able to, right now under current law, you can, the Constitution has this property tax exemption, but you have to pay all the taxes up front. And then you get a check about a year later on the back end with the reimbursement.
So you're going to get it anyways.
But the trouble is it doesn't really help you with the buying process,
you're
right?
You're going to give it back to me anyways. Why take it from me in the beginning?
Exactly. So my bill basically moves it up to the beginning of the process where you can actually get it while you're purchasing the home. So it increases your buying power if you're a veteran. And specifically it applies to disabled veterans, but it increases your buying power up front. So you can maybe buy a better home or have, a lower monthly payment or a better interest rate or whatever it might be, right? And so just something super common sense. It's run into some opposition, not surprisingly. But we've been working through it. And I was really thankful that the appropriations
You're going to give me the money back anyway. So
exactly.
Let me keep it.
Exactly. So it's such an interesting process. And glad to hear some of your bills are moving forward. I'm sure they're great. So
that your veteran one kind of reminds me of the gas tax thing where they're going to give us a check. That's my money already.
Yeah, so. Exactly. Why don't you just take it off the gallon of gas that I'm buying?
Correct.
I know it really is. It's always really fun to navigate those things. So let's shift gears. So that segment is obviously recapping what's been going on. This next segment, I like to kind of look ahead, right? What is coming down towards us in the legislature. We have 660 assembly bills currently pending that have to be passed by June 2nd. So are you ready for this? This house, it's called the House of Origin.
I got my sleeping bag ready. I got some jerky and some sodas ready.
Yeah, just settle in, right? We're going to be here a lot for the next couple weeks, and we've got a lot to get through. In fact, we're about to head to the floor in a few minutes here. But I wanted to highlight 5 bills. We'll call it the top 5 House of Origin bills that are headed our way. Now, I want to, make it clear that, there's a lot of really important bills. So picking 5 was impossible. So if you're listening and your important bill was not mentioned, please do not take offense because this could have been a complete different list of 5. These are just the 5 that I grabbed out of the grouping of bills. But, you could have a top 50, right? We could be here all day talking about the bills coming down. So, but just to get into a handful of the bills that are coming our way, we'll start off the top with the first bill that was introduced in the Assembly this year, AB 1, which is a bill to allow the unionization of legislative staff, creates a framework to provide employees of the legislature to unionize. You're actually a co-author on this bill. I know that everyone has different opinions on it, but I kind of wanted to get your take on, why you're co-authoring it and what your kind of opinion is on, just the framework of this bill.
Yeah. So for the listeners out there as well, so you may have a Republican representing, you may have a Democrat, but what you don't know is that staffing is different and their staff get paid definitely much different. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to even the playing field. It isn't fair that my ledge director should be making $30,000 less a year than a Democratic legislator. Or it doesn't also make sense that a Democratic representative has maybe, say, 12 team members, as opposed to you and I only having like 6.
Right.
So how is that serving our constituents just because of party? And so we're trying to, one, we're recognizing it and proving it, and people are like, wow, I didn't know there was a difference in pay. I didn't know there was a difference in staffing.
Yeah.
So we're trying to level the playing field on that because it isn't fair for constituents to be either punished or be rewarded, depending on what party they get. And so that's
a good point.
That's a big part of why I'm on this bill is to make sure it's equal. There's equity across the board. Because who's to say that this person's not as good as this person in the same position?
Yeah.
And I just didn't think that was unfair when I came up here. I didn't even know that was a thing until it was pointed out to me. I was like, well, that's not cool.
It's true. And as a former Republican staffer myself, I can speak very directly to that fact, right? Staff are treated very differently in the Republican caucus than they are in the Democratic caucus. I don't think it's a fair situation. It makes it obviously, I will say Republican staff do just as much work, if not more work, because there's actually fewer of them on each team. And so, you're spreading the workload out.
Wearing many hats.
Fewer people wearing many hats covering, each of my team in the Capitol covers like 15 different issue areas. I mean, it's crazy, right? And there is certainly an issue with the level playing field in the legislature. And full disclosure, by the way, I have not taken a position on this bill yet. I've been asked about it a million times, and it's something that I see the pros you're pointing out. And by the way, we welcome debate and disagreement on this show, so we don't have to agree on everything.
Healthy debate.
I have not taken a position on the bill yet, but I also see kind of the negatives and the concerns that have been raised by the other side, right? One of which is for the institution itself. Currently our staff are at-will employees. And in this line of work, trust is such a hugely important part of the job, right? You need your staff to trust you. You need to be able to trust your staff. They're the only state employees in the entire state that are not part of the civil service system. They don't have
at will.
They're at will, right? They don't have the civil service protections that other state employees have, and so it's kind of this kind of interesting in between situation that they find themselves in. And the concern raised by folks that are concerned about the bill would be that you kind of it's important to have that ability, right, to make staff changes if you need to make staff changes, or but the interesting thing that I find about that argument, and I actually see I see the points being made in that argument and actually agree with some of them, but the really interesting thing about that is almost the hypocrisy of it, because this legislature in particular is so pushes so hard on the unionization of every industry in California, and yet and to turn around and kind of reject it for yourself does seem kind of like a hypocritical position.
That
right?
seems to be the theme lately, huh? Hypocritical.
I mean, it is though,
yes,
right?
No, it is. 100%
is.
Like either are you for it or you're not.
Right.
I mean, you can't just pick and choose. I mean, kind of like the CEQA thing where we pick and choose certain projects. But that seems to be a theme up here also.
It's really fascinating. So I just think just purely from a consistency perspective, I get why the author is doing this. But it'll be interesting to see if it moves forward on the floor, and we'll have to keep tabs on it.
Yeah, I'm very interested. This is probably the most controversial one I have amongst our colleagues.
Okay, yeah.
And we've constantly asking me like, Juan, well, what about this? Well, what about this?
And
like, what if they make a PAC and they like endorse like, well,
right.
Well, so I've been involved with basically a union with Poor Act since '99. Yeah. So you not every law enforcement union group has a PAC. You have to actually have that in your bylaws. You have to have a PAC committee. Yeah. So not all of them have PACs.
Right.
But that's what people just assume. So there's a lot of unknowns, I guess you can say.
There are a lot of unknowns, and we've had some spirited conversations within our caucus on this. Yes. And so it's going to be interesting to see where everybody lands. But definitely appreciate the conversation. Bill number 2, AB 316, Aguiar-Curry, Friedman, is this autonomous trucking moratorium. Essentially requires a licensed commercial driver to be physically present in any vehicle, even if it's autonomous, indefinitely, right? There's no sunset date on this bill.
That's what I was just going to ask about sunset.
Right.
So no sunset.
So I think that's kind of been, and this bill actually came through one of my committees. Again, full disclosure, I'm the only no vote in the entire assembly, or I guess the entire legislature on this bill right now. And it's in large part because of that issue, the sunset date issue. But it's been a fascinating discussion because you do have folks on both sides. It's not exactly a party line thing. The proponents of the bill are continuing to, obviously this is a bill that will protect jobs for truck drivers, which is a priority for the proponents. But they're also arguing that this will improve or help public safety on our highways. And we've got some of our colleagues are co-authors on this bill. Our Republican colleagues are co-authors on this bill for that reason. And so, it's been a really interesting discussion. I don't know if you've talked to your staff or your team or have given it any thought yet, but
we really haven't given this one much, I guess, effort.
Yeah.
But in the discussions that we had just recently as last week, just amongst the pros and the cons, it's going to be interesting where everybody's chips lie on this one.
It is,
and I see both sides, just like AB1, I see both sides. But going into the future, if you keep looking at all these movies and stuff like that, it's pretty much what it's going to be going to.
Yeah.
And like the truck drivers in my neck of the woods, they actually had no opinion on this.
Really?
Because we reached out to them like, hey, what do you guys think? Like, nah, we're okay. They
That's
do it.
really
They do
interesting. Yeah.
So I don't know if it's because they own the trucking companies and they're going to get their, maybe they won't have to pay an employee or whatever. Maybe that's the truck part that was talking to me.
Well, and the opponents of the bill actually argue that this will increase efficiency in the economy, which will, potentially create new and, different and more jobs, right? If we increase efficiency in the economy. I think time will tell on that. But, I think you were a law enforcement, or you are a law enforcement officer. To me, I've always thought that the humans were the least safe thing on the road anyway. And I think that's what kind of gets me from the public safety standpoint of this bill is, how many car accidents and truck accidents do we have because of human operators? And again, it's just because humans are flawed, right?
Well,
we're not perfect.
That presentation we just had last week, they said that the incidents that they did have was because a human interfered with the operation.
Right.
So I was like, oh, well, maybe, maybe they shouldn't have gotten involved.
So it's just really interesting to me. I've always seen this technology as something that will improve the safety of our roads in the long term, right? And I think a lot of people are caught up with the fact that it's not ready for prime time yet, which I think
we'll be there eventually.
Right? But we will be there eventually. And, I think it has the potential to save a lot of lives in the future. But it'll be really interesting to see. I think a policy this major, I think a sunset date would be great, so we can have some time to test it out and really see if it's still needed in a few years.
Yeah, sunset would be definitely, not indefinitely. Like
we'll see if that happens. We'll see if that continues as it moves, if it moves off the floor to the Senate. Moving on to bill number 3, AB 377. I snuck this one in there because I'm a co-author, so that's that's really the reason. But basically, it aims to increase funding for career technical education in California. And just really find ways to expand opportunities for kids that might not be on the college track, but we still want them to have great careers.
Mm-hmm.
We want to be able to make a good living. And that's why I co-authored this bill. I was really happy to see it get out of appropriations because I was worried that it was going to get stuck there. So this bill is going to be moving forward.
Oh, this is a big issue in my neck of the woods as well, because we're trying to find schooling for kids. Because college, like you said, college is not for everybody.
Yeah.
And some people have success stories that say, hey, I've never been to college, but that's because they're hardworking, they're dedicated, they're motivated. And I have found that just in our high schools, the programs that we have that are focusing on certain careers, you usually find those careers excelling in the area.
Yeah.
And so to bring others in there, especially with the buildings, trades and all that,
absolutely,
get more welders, get more carpenters,
builders,
all of them.
It really is so important, I think, that our students are exposed to their other options, right? And I think, college is fantastic. I think, if you're able and cut out to go to college, we obviously want to provide those opportunities in California and make it possible for any kid to do that. But for the kids that are just like, it just doesn't really fit what I'm, what my specialty is or what, my passion is. I think exposing students to other opportunities in other fields, it not only helps them, but it also helps, obviously our workforce, our, locally, our, all of the things, the employees that we need to make big stuff, great stuff happen. It's just a win-win across the board.
And even financially. So like I started out as an Explorer Scout. So I was a volunteer that went out, and some of those that were explorers with me discovered pretty quick that, hey, I thought I wanted to be a cop, but I don't want to be a cop. So then, they didn't have to invest schooling, the academy, and all that.
Yeah.
Going into a career that they were going to find out that they didn't like. So they were able to jump off that track and go a different route. Maybe it was still in public safety, it just wasn't being a cop.
That's amazing.
Maybe a dispatcher, probation, something else, or completely different at all. And so I think that also will help our youth.
That's awesome.
Get them the bug early and see if they like it or not.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. So excited for that one. Definitely any way we can help expand career technical education, I'm all about it. Bill number 4, AB 421, remaking the referenda and initiative process. So just this one's kind of in the weeds, but it's going to have some pretty major impacts. So it requires petition circulators of referenda or statewide initiative measures to register and complete training with the Secretary of State, to circulate petitions on yellow paper, to wear large badges stating if they're paid circulators, to frequently update petitions with top contributors. It reduces the circulation period, so the time you have to circulate petitions to get an initiative on the ballot. It changes it from 180 days to 90 days, which is a huge change. It also requires proponents of an initiative or referenda to obtain 10% of the signatures from volunteers. And then the kicker at the end, all of these changes that apply to the citizens initiative process, which has existed for pretty much the entire history of our state, it exempts unions and other nonprofits from these requirements. And so I think, this is a big one, in my opinion, because I really view the initiative process and the referendum process. Referendums tend to be put forward on things that the legislature does that aren't great, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which, I think we do a number of things that probably aren't the best policy. And the referendum process gives the citizens the ability to undo those things. The initiative process gives citizens the ability to get around the legislature if the legislature is an obstacle to change. And so I really view this as a major attack on really the only way that citizens really can have a voice beyond the legislature. And I'm really concerned about, this moving forward. So I'm curious to get your thoughts.
And again, this is another one of those common themes. Yeah. It applies to everybody, but
right.
this person, this person, this person. And I have found being up here that it's the unions that are much more organized up here.
Yeah.
I mean, they're here every day, right? They have people here every day on the Me Too's and stuff like that. So I would see this making it even easier for them with taking it down to 90 days. Because if there's something that comes up and, say, a group of us come together, we're not going to be as organized as a union would be. And there's no way we're going to get it done in 90 days.
Yeah.
So I could see where this is kind of aimed towards and to it favors.
Yeah. Well, and it's tough, right? And obviously this bill has received a lot of opposition from the business community and other folks that really use the initiative process and the referenda process to fix things that, let's be honest, the legislature might have messed up. And I think it's fair to say the legislature is not always right. I believe that. I'm sure that even some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would sometimes agree that we get it wrong.
Well, I think we get it wrong a lot. I mean, that's another reason why I'm up here.
That's why we're here, right?
Because there's some that I don't agree with. And then I also see with this, because like when we have like Prop 47 came up and stuff, right? You have these play on words, safe school and neighborhoods.
Great point.
They're going to trick us again. And
well, and that is a great point. And I will just say that our colleague in the Senate, Senator Roger Nilo, has a proposal that I think, I'm strongly opposed to changing the initiative process. But if there is a change that is needed, it is to change how ballot titles are written. And so he actually has a proposal. Currently, they're written, as you mentioned, Prop 47 was called the Safe Schools and Neighborhoods Act. Didn't really have anything to do with any of that stuff.
But we voted on it thinking, yes,
and we voted on it. Yeah,
let's make the schools safer.
Exactly.
Let's make her. And
why wouldn't you want that, right?
Had nothing to do with that.
But the reason for that a lot of people don't realize, and actually, I tend to explain to a lot of my friends, like you gotta dive a little deeper than the title, right? When you're analyzing initiatives before you vote, because it's written by a partisan official, the Attorney General. Now, a lot of states don't do it this way, but in California, it's written by a partisan official who can inject a certain lean, right, into that ballot title, lean. Right? So exactly, right? And in the case of Prop 47 is a big one. Senator Nilo's bill would actually take it away from the Attorney General and place it in the hands of the Nonpartisan Legislative Analyst's Office, which I think is a fantastic idea. The LAO does amazing work, keeping us accountable in the legislature. Correct. They were created to be a nonpartisan voice that informs the legislature outside of the bounds
good
of
or
politics.
Bad, this is how it is.
Exactly. Like, this is how it is. They already write all of the analyses for the initiatives. They just don't write the title. I think giving this to them makes a ton of sense. That actually got out of its first committee.
This is the first I've heard of it.
Yeah,
I think
it hasn't made it over to us yet.
Let's put our names on that one.
Exactly. If there's one change that needs to happen, I think it's that one.
I agree.
More nonpartisan analysis and less partisanship, right, in the initiative process. So anyway, that's going to be an issue. And the last bill, AB 799, accountability on addressing homelessness. It creates the Homeless Accountability and Results Act, requiring local agencies to regularly update a financing plan to solve homelessness by 2035, to establish and update statewide performance metrics by updating the statewide action plan for preventing homelessness by 2025, requires, basically, it ties funds to results, which I think is fantastic. We'll see the impact that it has, but I brought this one in here more generally just to talk about the topic of homelessness, because we have spent $20 billion in the last 6 years or so on homelessness, and we've seen it skyrocket. Our homeless population is bigger than it's ever been. We have a quarter of the nation's homelessness in California. And I think, I don't know about you, but I hear about this every time I go to my district, right? So whether, to the extent that this can move the needle, I'm very supportive of it. So.
And so I like this also, but I think you're going to have to also go back to the framework or to the core of it. Again, bringing up Prop 47. I still see Prop 47. I mean, you said 6 years ago.
Yeah.
It's around the same time that we were no longer allowed to bring them into jail because those were misdemeanors. And that's where the majority of the problems came, and they got their help. So I think until we actually address that issue too, we're just going to continue to throw money at this. And it's unfortunate.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think the devil's always in the details. I mean, it's easy to say, you want more metrics and performance metrics tied to funding. But at the end of the day, we have to be able to make actual policy changes too. It's not, and I think time will tell if we're willing to do that or not. I was super thankful, actually. I put forward a proposal to audit homelessness spending in California. We passed that 12-0 out of the Legislative Audit Committee. And my favorite thing, by the way, about the Legislative Audit Committee is that it doesn't need to be signed by the governor. So when you pass an audit, it just goes into effect and the state auditor gets to work, versus a bill, right, where you have to get it signed by the governor. But I think that's really important because on issues like homelessness, this audit's probably going to show some things that the state's doing that's probably not great. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important that we have those accountability mechanisms when we're talking about homelessness specifically.
So I like this audit thing. Do we get to do that with like the water too? Can we maybe do an audit on where's our money from?
Let's talk about it. Actually, they may have actually done some on that. I'm going to have to go back and look. But the audit committee, I feel like, is a very underutilized committee because it's all about oversight and accountability. Of the, of state agencies, of the governor, of the state, bureaucracy, right? And I just think all of that is so important to giving us information we need to legislate, right? So
I'd love to see that. I'd love to see where some of the money went that the voters passed. And
it's hopefully going to be back in October, so we'll have to make that a future episode for sure. Any other bills that you've seen that you want to talk about, or?
I had my very first bill that went to the Senate right away.
Nice.
Nevaeh's sports. I'm going to get the title wrong, but basically it's Nevaeh's law in a sense.
Okay.
AEDs.
Oh, okay.
Automatic external
Yes,
defibrillator.
yeah.
So I'm sure the viewers out there, you guys were probably watching the football game where one of the players collapsed. Basically, an AED brought this person back.
That's awesome.
And so what we're trying to do is make these available to our kids as well. Right now, the law states that there has to be an AED available during school hours for school activities, but it doesn't say anything if you maybe have a Pop Warner or some cheerleading squad that's borrowing or renting the facilities. So unfortunately, with Nevaeh, 10-year-old out of Waterford, the AED wasn't available. It was locked up in the principal's office, and there was one locked up in the gym area.
Wow.
And then also a 14-year-old also in the Manteca area, they didn't have access to an AED there either. So this is to have AEDs available the whole time. And
that's awesome.
So hopefully we'll be saving some lives. It's terrible that we had to lose lives and the technology was present there, but just not accessible.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, glad to hear that's in the Senate.
Yes.
Hopefully that one keeps flying
I hope it
through.
does.
The last thing in this, just in the looking forward segment of the podcast, since we both sit on the Problem Solvers Caucus,
Yes.
There was a nice little Cal Matters article recently on, I'm just going to read you the title. We don't need to get into the article, but it was, Can Bipartisan Caucuses Change the California Legislature? And, I think it's a valid question. I joined the Problem Solvers Caucus. By the way, for those that don't know what it is a group of about, I think, 21 legislators, 11 Democrats, 10 Republicans, evenly split bipartisan caucus. And our goal is to, in a bipartisan fashion, come up with solutions to some of California's greatest challenges. I think conceptually, we're kind of a newer caucus, but it's a fantastic goal, and it gives us a bipartisan voice that I think is crucially wanted and needed in California.
Correct, and we're taking the approach and asking the questions that we couldn't do on the floor and anything like that. We're actually doing in our meetings.
Exactly.
I think it's great. I enjoy going to those meetings. I learn something every time we have our meetings.
Yeah,
because the way it's presented and then the way that our caucus all talks about it, I can feed off of either this person or that person, what they're saying, and make sense of it all.
So do you think this is a way, that kind of the new way, especially with the imbalance we see in the legislature, that we're going to be able to impact change in California is coming together and, caucuses like this? I do.
I think this is our solution to what we were talking about the speaker earlier, talking about how it's, shameful that it is the way it is. Yeah. I think this is our solution or our way of combating that. Yeah, we may not get the numbers on the floor, but we'll find our way around it and bring it back for the better of California.
Yeah.
And so I think this was a great idea. I'm glad we're both part of it, and I look forward to it growing.
Yeah.
Hopefully it'll get even more popular. People actually see what we're doing, and we haven't taken as much action as we should right now. But I think the way that we're going right now of educating ourselves before we just jump right completely into it is also a great approach.
Yeah. No, it's really excited to be part of the Problem Solvers, and looking forward to solving some actual problems.
Yes.
And, again, as we talked about earlier, in this age of hyperpartisanship, the ability to come together in a bipartisan fashion is so needed, in my opinion. So
agreed.
Really excited that we're going to be able to use it to do that as well. All right. Now, just for fun segment, okay? Just for fun. I had to ask you, because I see you tweeting all the time about this, but you're part of the Grilled Cheese Caucus.
Oh, yes.
Okay, what the heck is this?
The Grilled Cheese Caucus.
What are the bylaws? And seriously, though, how did this come about? I want to hear the story.
So this came about with Isaac Bryan, Joe Patterson, kind of texting around. So it started with the airport. The Sacramento airport, and talking about grilled cheese there. And
that's it. Okay,
so we had all been there at once, Mr. Bryan saw me there. And so so I got looped in it because I was at the airport and we were talking about good food and stuff like that. But then it just kind of morphed into a kind of being a bipartisan thing in a sense too, just coming together, having fun. Awesome. Obviously this Grilled Cheese Caucus isn't an official thing, but we do that anyways. We had the 4-4 caucus kind of thing, right?
So some people get together for drinks and dinner, and you guys get together for grilled cheese.
Actually, the last time I posted something on our group text, I was at an event that had grilled cheese. So, and we had Bill say Bill was part of it. He got to have a picture in it too. So.
Well, I do love some grilled cheese, so maybe I'll consider joining.
We might have to do that.
What is the process for joining this caucus? Is it pretty lengthy and extensive?
It's a long process. It's kind of like CEQA, but you know what? Just like the theme, we'll let a couple of them come through. So you could just all right. And the other thing that we talking to Isaac about this prior is you can have any cheese you want, any bread you want. You can toast it any way you want. We're not judgmental.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's just a way we can all come together and still be friends great. That. And
I'll have to
common ground.
I'll have to join one of these days. Yes. That's pretty awesome. Well, we're going to move into our final segment here, which is our clip of the week. I'm going to play a clip of our fearless Republican leader, James Gallagher, who spoke out on the floor last week. We were debating a resolution, and we don't need to get too deep in the resolution, but we were debating a resolution on this situation that happened in Tennessee with the state legislature, where a couple members were expelled from the body after using bullhorns on the floor to kind of get their message out, breaking the rules of decorum, but then they were expelled, which I think a lot of folks thought went too far. And then I think they have since been reinstated.
Correct.
So that's kind of just the context. But there was a resolution put forward in our legislature kind of denouncing that expulsion, but also I think going a little beyond that, in my opinion, and in what was in the resolution itself. It was a little bit more than just the expulsion of these legislators. But James Gallagher gave some really interesting comments, really not so much on the resolution as much as it was a commentary on our current legislature and looking within, right, and being introspective on what we do on a daily basis. So let's play this clip, and then we'll get.
And so, is this of Gallagher speaking?
This is of Gallagher speaking.
Okay, so just so you listeners also know that prior to all this, you had a lot of Assembly members also standing up to show support for this as well.
Good point. Yeah,
talking about being fair, talking about democracy, talking about all these points to show that basically Tennessee was wrong for doing this to a minority group, to the superminority group, as we are, the superminority party here in California.
Absolutely.
So this was the point, and this was the theme that was going on for the 10 minutes or 15 minutes that it was going before Mr. Gallagher spoke. So just keep that in mind.
Really good context, and this is a really short clip. It's not his whole speech, but we'll play it here.
110 people a week are dying from fentanyl in this state. And yet you continue to not hear bills, proposals that we brought forward, that Republicans brought forward. We have ideas too. So when you tell me, oh, we want all the ideas and we want to make sure that everybody has input. No, you don't. And you haven't shown it by your actions. So don't get up here and preach to me about democracy and talk about other states. The message of Representative Jones is not just for Tennessee. It's for you.
That's obviously, I think you went on for about 5 minutes.
Hey, that was a great speech.
It was a great speech. And obviously, I love it when James speaks from the heart because, he has been through a lot in this legislature, and he's navigated a lot of tough situations and seen kind of the treatment of the superminority party, as you mentioned, in the legislature. And I think this was him really channeling frustrations with what we have. I mean, in getting our bills. I mean, so many of our bills don't even get a hearing in committee because they're not deemed, they're not.
Like our fentanyl bills. We had, look what we had to do. We didn't get a big microphone on the floor, but we did hold a press conference. We got the public involved. And that was our way of making things happen. And we did it the correct way, the right way.
Right. Yeah. But it's frustrating, right? I mean, it's very frustrating when we want to just have a conversation and have a vote, and it gets shut down on way too many occasions. So have you felt that way as well?
Oh yeah, no, everything he said, I'm sure all of us felt, all 18 of us. The good thing also that came of that is if you looked at the room, people started to reflect on what was being said, like, oh, he's got a good point here. That's what they're going through. That's what these 18 out of us 80 have been going through. Yeah. And here we are throwing a big party for this one of many, or a couple guys. And then it's like, oh, shoot. It's like, we almost should have handed out mirrors. And
that's a really good. That would have been great.
If we would have had time, maybe.
Yeah.
Because as you noticed, Mr. Gibson, who originally gave his introduction, he speaks very well. He's very into when he talks, and he was very into this one. Yeah. But then after James Gallagher spoke, he kind of brought his tone down a little bit. Yeah. After that, because I think they did start to realize, like, oh shoot, this is how we're treating our 18 here too. Yeah. So I did like that James Gallagher got through to them right there in that moment.
Yeah. And I think the point needed to be made, and before our time there, and this is the rules within which we operate now, but a few years back, our House rules for the Assembly actually stated that a bill shall get a hearing in committee. That's what the rule stated. It was a shall. A few years back, when we every year at the beginning of the year we pass our rules for the year that we're going to operate within. They changed that shall to a may. So if you actually look at our rules now, it says that any bill that is introduced in the legislature may receive a hearing at the discretion of the chair of the committee that it goes to. And that was a monumental change, in my opinion, to the way this House operates. And this is just one example of where I feel like we're not meeting the mark when it comes to openness and transparency and democracy. Right?
Well, and of course it got voted on because
and they voted
the majority.
The majority voted on it. They silenced the superminority once again by basically giving committee chairs the full power and weight to deny a hearing, not to vote a bill down, to deny a hearing on a bill just because you don't like the idea that is being put forward.
Yeah, for an assembly person who was voted by their district to represent their district and the state.
Exactly.
Give them the power to just deny everything.
Exactly. And that is not democracy, and so I think that's where, we're getting lectured on democracy in the chamber where we're being silenced. And that was what James was really trying to get at. And I think, we do not always do a good job in the California legislature of upholding the democratic principles that, some folks in the majority claim to care so much about. And so I really hope that, that got through. It was interesting. Ashley Zavala, who's a local reporter here, they actually had the Tennessee legislator in Sacramento for this and did a press conference afterwards. And she asked, I love Ashley because she always asks the best questions. She asked Justin Jones, who was this legislator that was expelled in Tennessee, if supermajorities are good for democracy, which I thought was a great question, right? And his answer was, you put me on the spot with this question. I think what's working here in California is that all voices are being heard. Okay, now look, I'm gonna let Justin slide on this one because he's not familiar with how it works here, and I think he was a little put on the spot with this question. But I can guarantee you that all voices are not being heard in this legislature. We have crime victims that are constantly being silenced. You serve on the Public Safety Committee where law enforcement and victims' voices get silenced every single week. I think the answer is pretty simple. No, I don't think so. Supermajorities are good.
He was put on democracy. The spot for that
one. That's why I love Ashley. She's just so she asks the hard hitting questions. But would you agree with that? I mean,
we're living it right now.
Yeah.
And until people when you and I we give speeches, we talk Sacramento in our districts. Like, how can we help? How can we help? Well, it's like-minded people is who we need.
Absolutely. Totally agree. Well, hey, I've taken a lot of your time. We're going to wrap up. Any final thoughts for the good of the order here?
No, I had a great time. I'm very proud of you for doing this. I think this is a great idea. I think a lot of people are not as educated with what's going on up here, and I think this will give them a good avenue.
Yeah,
or at least a resource to find out what's really going on.
That's the goal. Let's shine a light on some of the stuff that's going on. All right. And then, so just real quick, one announcement. The podcast is now available on Spotify. You can search it up under Point of Order Podcast. It's coming soon to Apple, Google, and Amazon. You can also, any listeners, if they have any ideas or future topics that they want discussed, you can email them to pointoforderpod@gmail.com. You can watch and subscribe on YouTube at Point of Order Pod. You can also follow the pod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Point of Order Pod. And finally, you can follow the members on this podcast, on Twitter, myself at Joshua_Hoover. And then what's the best way? I believe it's at Juan Alanis CA.
I'm going to go with that.
That's what I saw before the show. So that's what we're going to go with. But follow Juan on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter as well. Really appreciate you listening today, and we'll see you next time.